also Ms. Rowan Answorth from the Consul General Australia, Consul General in Calcutta. Welcome, Rowan. Really nice to have you. We have Dr. Syed Muntashi Mamoon, who is the Director General, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Bangladesh. Welcome, sir, and really happy to have you in this panel. And we have Shashank Ray, who is the Assistant General Manager, NADI. Again, welcome to you, Shashank. So I know there is a lot of pressure on this panel to keep to time. A little unfortunate that I really have to be strict on this one. I would love to hear more. So I am not really going to speak too much and abuse my power as the chair. I'm just going to say three things and then hand it over to the speaker. And Rowan, I'll just go with you first, if that's okay. I will move to Shashank after that to you, and then I will come to you, Dr. Muntashi, and I will let Ambassador, you take the final word in this session. Also, you can catch some breath after coming from the airport. 3 points, I think. We are looking at this issue, and as you all know, when we look at agriculture and sustainable development, we are looking at really environmental health, we are looking at economic profitability, and more importantly, we are also looking at social equity. That's something that we all need to keep in mind, because we are also talking about sustainable livelihood, climate smart agriculture, in the context of economies and countries who are at different levels of development with a very different social structure. And I think those issues are critical to keep in mind when we talk about what we are suggesting as contributing collaborating factors across the region. So with that, I would now pass on the mic to you, Ms. Answorth, for your comments on this issue. And I guess we have an hour for this panel, 45 minutes. Maybe I'll give you about 7 minutes, if that's okay. Perfect. Thank you.
So, namaskar, esteemed panelists, thank you. Our hosts and guests today, thank you very much. Very happy to join you all today for this third edition of NADI. And I'd like to thank the organisers, Asian Confluence, with the support of the Ministry of External Affairs, and of course the Government of Assam and the Northeastern Council as well. It's vital to have these conversations to develop better understandings of the solutions that we need to undertake together towards a stronger, healthier regional collaboration. And I think all of us present here are here because we share an understanding that it is crucial to strengthen the region's agricultural and water security. Australia and India are like-minded in our vision for the region. We both seek an open, inclusive and resilient Indo-Pacific, underpinned, of course, by a secure and resilient Bay of Bengal. And I think that was confirmed just last week in Tokyo when our new Prime Minister, Albanese, met your Prime Minister, Modi, at the Quad in Tokyo. India's northeast sits in a fast-changing geopolitical landscape, connecting us here in India with immediate neighbours and through to Southeast Asia. And as is the way of things, this interconnectedness extends on many levels, from culture and community connections to trading ties, particularly in agriculture, but we'd like to see that extend. But most communities, most families, most people in the region depend on shared resources for their livelihoods. And with agriculture being the prime source of income for many communities, it is vital to ensure that practices are sustainable. And I would again like to underline how aligned Australia and India are in the solutions that we seek for advancing sustainable agriculture in the region. Agriculture research and development has been an important and long-standing area of bilateral cooperation. Benefits accrue to both countries. There's a significant sharing of knowledge, and institutional capacity is developed. Australia's collaborative programs and partnerships with Indian researchers, farming groups and other organisations have enabled Australia to become a trusted partner in support of India's food security and climate resilient agricultural goals. And for both of us, sustainability is the key. In November last year, I had the pleasure of attending the inauguration of the Centre of Excellence for Conservation Agriculture at North Bengal Agricultural University in Cooch Behar, funded by the Australian government through the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, or ACR, as we call it. A milestone in the advancement for conservation agriculture through sustainable intensification, the centre is contributing to more resilient and inclusive farming systems in eastern India and the neighbouring regions. It is providing comprehensive training to farm machinery hire operators, to farmers with a focus on women farmers and youth farmers, and to scientists in the broader region, and that includes Nepal and Bangladesh. The project has introduced technologies that minimise soil disturbance, maintain continuous soil cover and crop rotation, and has tested for adoption improved varieties of rice and wheat, crop diversification, crop and soil management strategies such as zero tillage, laser land levelling, intercropping, stubble retention, improved water management, better agronomy, and small-scale mechanisation. Our shared interest in conservation agriculture has fostered numerous collaborations drawing on Australia's strengths in agricultural technology. One example is the Happy Seeder. I love that one because I love that name, but it's a sowing machine jointly developed by Indian and Australian designers and engineers to meet Indian small farm needs and Indian soil conditions specifically. The machine reduces the need for crop residue burning and increases yields. And training in farming machinery such as the Happy Seeder and mechanical rice transplanter are being supported by subsidising the rental of equipment to farmers. And all of this work builds on our long-standing cooperation under the Australian government's Sustainable Development Investment Portfolio to keep improving the management of water, of energy and food resources in the region. ACR, in my ministry, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, undertakes most of this work on behalf of the Australian government. So ACR is funded as part of our overseas support program, and its aims are to reduce poverty, to improve food security, and to care for the natural agricultural resource base. And it contributes to these goals in a big way through the Sustainable Resilient Farming Systems Intensification Program, which is a regional collaboration project involving partners in India, Bangladesh, Australia, and Nepal. ACR plays a valuable role in advancing cooperation and enabling research expertise on sustainable agri-food systems and water management across the East. As you can see in our work here, not only do we recognise the importance of regional efforts in continuously improving agricultural practices, we're also making interventions that we believe will have a far-reaching impact for the ecosystem, identifying which mechanisms work best in a given region with its particular climatic and geographic peculiarities is key to developing a set of practices that will prove beneficial in the long run. Australian scientists are well placed to work with India to address agricultural issues for the simple reason that the two countries share many of the same physical and climate-related features. We all were once part of Gondwana land after all. For instance, the Sundarbans, the world's largest mangroves and a shared resource between India and Bangladesh, the Sundarbans' sensitive ecosystem is vulnerable to the impact of climate change. So getting the balance right is vital. Ensuring sustainable agricultural practices that offer a viable livelihood opportunity to farmers with an approach that is not detrimental to the ecosystem at large is crucial. In the Sundarbans, the Australian government is working to improve rural livelihoods through crop intensification and increased productivity in the coastal zones of Bangladesh and West Bengal, particularly in the dry season, through integrated soil, water, and crop management. Our project partners are working on both scientific research in the laboratory and field implementation to develop cropping systems that withstand local conditions, including saline-resistant crops. So it's not just the scientific choice of plants. Together with local farmers, they're developing a package of practices to improve production across the board. And here too, zero tillage and crop rotation are mentioned as simple and cost-effective changes to cultivation that allow for a variety of crops to be grown throughout the year in a region that was mostly used for paddy cultivation in the season and not much else for the remainder of the year. The shift away from monocropping of rice introduced nitrogen-fixing legumes. And for a region exposed to both salt and rainwater inundation, interspersed with periods of extreme dryness, efficient water utilisation has been a key outcome of this project. The introduction of different farming methods included an emphasis on swapping chemical fertilisers for organic composting, and these measures have together translated into cheaper cultivation and health benefits for families. And so on my visit to the Sundarbans earlier this month, it was heartening to hear from the farmers themselves about the far-reaching effect this project has had in both supporting livelihoods and supplementing families' nutritional needs. And I saw farmers experimenting with different types of grasses, literally grassroots interactions, and they were trying to use different grasses as fodder for livestock, leading to increased animal breeding and turning livestock rearing into an additional income source. Where farming was earlier more hand-to-mouth, there is now a growing interest in diversification. Another of the Australian government's simplest tools for creating livelihood projects is our Direct Aid Program, or DAP as we call it. And this grant program supports very small projects that have a strong community development focus and contribute to sustained poverty reduction in East and Northeast India. Our DAP program in this region is supporting the livelihood security of small farm holders, mostly from tribal families, with a big emphasis on health and on women's economic empowerment. Nutrition gardens in West Bengal and Odisha are strengthening families' health, as well as empowering women farmers through improved financial independence, that is through the sale of their produce. Here in Assam, we're supporting a program on system root intensification, which is enhancing farm production for vulnerable families, adding to the nutrition basket, as well as providing an income source for the women farmers who are spearheading the project. In Tripura, our DAP program has empowered tribal women by training them in livestock rearing and providing them with employment options, which in turn reduces the prospect of unsafe migration or trafficking. And in Kuch Behar, women and youth are trying techniques such as stubble retention, nutrition management, crop rotation, intercropping, and other strategies. In Nagaland, farmers are improving their food production through sustainable farming practices, reclaiming wasteland for vegetable farming, using better quality seeds, and irrigation water management. So our direct aid program is ongoing and will continue to identify rural communities which could benefit from interventions that improve agricultural production in a sustainable way. The programs enable capacity building, training and market access for the communities in general, and women in particular, identifying them as farmers in their own right, who play an important role in production. In every place we visited, it was the women who were taking charge of production and cultivation, as well as undertaking the financial management of extra income. Indeed, we like to think that the economic empowerment of women in rural agrarian communities has been a particular success of our DAP projects. And this ties in with our goal of looking through the lens of diversity and gender equality and women's empowerment in everything that we undertake. We heard from many women farmers about how their roles in the family were elevated because of their participation in these projects, from not being allowed to go out to work without permission These women are now being acknowledged and encouraged to continue with the agricultural production they so successfully started. And the success of the project in itself has served as a confidence-building measure and encouraged more women to join. And as I mentioned, they and their families began to see themselves as farmers, contributing to the family's financial needs, bettering the family's health, saving for their children's education, using that additional income. Any attempt to usher in change will have a multi-level impact. Regional cooperation in agriculture does not just stop at production and cultivation. It translates into increased market awareness, climate positive practices, women's economic empowerment, better trade terms between neighbouring nations, and a change that is not just high impact but also sustainable. A people-centric regional narrative is what this conference proposes to focus on, and I think that is getting right to the heart of the issue. As India's northeast and her neighbours continue to work together to foster sustainable development and inclusive economic growth, the Australian government remains committed in its aim to work together with you and your partners in shaping a region that benefits from our complementarities and aligns with our values to support an open, inclusive and resilient Indo-Pacific. Thank you very much. And with these comments, I'd like to hand over to my other delegates. I hope I haven't gone over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arun and Sud. I think you did go over time, and we are going to try and keep time very close on this one. And I think your narrative on looking at more a people-centric regional development and with agriculture at the heart and food security is essential. I'm going to go to our next speaker, and I'd like to invite Mr. Shashank Ray, Assistant General Manager, NADI, to please give us remarks. Thank you, Shashank.
So thank you so much, ma'am, and esteemed panelists, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm Shashank Rai. I'm representing Northeastern Development Finance Corporation, which is the only development finance corporation which this region is having. And our main mandate is the overall socio-economic and industrial growth of the region, which we try to achieve by providing credit linkages to various enterprises by way of term lending, by way of venture funding. And also we are working on issues like cross-border collaboration, the economic linkages, the possibility and all. So these are our activities. We are engaged in that. So from that point of view, now coming back to the subject, like since we are working in all sectors, so and this is the primary sector. Agriculture is the primary sector, and which provide a backbone to all sectors and for the well-being of the socio-economic thing. So now here in this thing, I would start with the subject is very vast, and although I'm not from that field of research, but I'll try to share my thought on this. So I'll start with the food security issue first, because that is one of the most global problem the whole world is facing now. Providing food security to ever-growing population, which is predicted to reach 9 billion by 2050. So now this itself shows us, and the resources we are having is limited water, and finite land resources. And coupled with this, if we see the growing per capita income in the growing economies like BRICS, Brazil, India, China, Russia, and South Africa. So, and the change in the consumer pattern, eating habits and all. So the pressure on this provide food security is tremendous on the whole world, and more so for this Bay of Bengal region, because this is one of the most populous region of the planet, if we see, like including China, India, Bangladesh, if we combine. So we have got the more to do on this front, which I feel like. Now, here I would like to share one data which will give you put things in perspective. Like in India's case, like in year 1951, with a population of 361 million, we were having the per capita availability of water, like it was 5,177 cubic meter. In 1951, per capita, each person was having like its water availability. In 2011, with the population of 1.15 billion, the per capita reduced to 1625 cubic meter. Now it is projected that in 2025, with a projected population of 1.39 billion, we will have a per capita water availability of 1345 cubic meter. And by 2050, with 1.64 billion projected population, our country will have per capita water availability of only 1140, 1140 cubic meter. Now this itself shows now it brings to other, like while ensuring food security is an issue, now it brings us to the sustainability. Like, see, we have finite resources, finite water. Now, how we manage it, and how the regional cooperation and the sustainable agriculture practices can help us in this regard. Now, coming back to the, this is the immediate concern, the whole water, how to use water efficiently. But the food security issue is not just related to water per se. It's a multi-dimensional approach is required to address it. And there are other dimensions also which I would like to share with you all. And the one dimension is like infrastructure, providing infrastructure, water productivity, irrigation, drainage and water storage, access to public infrastructure services like rural roads, rural electrification, market infrastructure, rural town development, and resilience against natural disaster. So that kind of infrastructure also we need to bring to provide food security. Now, coming to the environment, we need to do the integrated water resource management, climate change mitigation and adoption, biogas or rural renewable energy. So infrastructure, environment, finance, education, agriculture, health, working in all these areas is very important to ensure the food security also. It's just not the topic of agriculture, but we need to create such an infrastructure which helps in creating food security. So giving food security is not just related to water or availability of water. So many things dimension is required. Now, coming to the sustainable use of like how we can achieve the sustainability, and now I'll come to the regional cooperation also, how regional cooperation can help this. So like in see, there's a lot of things which the world over is happening, a lot of institutions are working on all these fronts, and they're suggesting strategies and all. But there are two major, if we can see, we can combine in two major strategies. One is a watershed management, where we try to manage a water based on the water it receives. We like the rain-fed agriculture. Whatever water it is receiving, it is storing it properly, and it is using in when it is a deficient time, with the many interventions so that is one thing which we are practicing, the world is practicing. Even in India, we had an integrated watershed management program. It's a long-running program which already I think has finished. Its impact is yet to be assessed. So that is one thing which already working, and another thing which has still not happened, and especially on the banks of river Brahmaputra, I can say that we are just near Brahmaputra, and which really require attention of policymakers, technocrats, and even politicians also, the issue of integrated river basin management, which we have not. See, we have a mighty river Brahmaputra, we always talk about this. We even, when we started our structure, this session, we kept silence for also all these rivers for 1 minute. Now it's real time to do, because this has been a concept which is lagging for a long time in integrated river basin management. Now this not only solves your problem, although there are issues with this worldwide. See, there are not, there are very few success stories like Tennessee Valley Corporation, which is a great success story, which can give us an example. But for us, like it's really to work like trading off. For us, like development is also important, sustainability is also important, environment is also important. Our region, India, especially Northeast India, which is lagging far behind. So we need to really think in that line where we can have some real transformational changes in this region. Just working on small, this will not do. And as the name is NADI, and I'll like to take this platform to call to all policymakers and whoever can like contribute in this regard to really, because in case of Brahmaputra, I'll just like to share a few facts, what it requires. So it's a, Brahmaputra is a transboundary river, and is being managed differently in different basin countries based on their respective national policies. Now, these are the political boundaries. No? Nation boundaries are like this. These are, no, but the geographical, the Mother Nature has given us the real boundary is the basin boundary. So if you manage a river basin properly, so hopefully all our problem will be solved. But we are not doing that. So here I'd like to say Brahmaputra is the largest river system in South Asia. And it originates in Kailash Range, Tibet Autonomous Region, and it traverses through China for 1625 kilometer, India 918 kilometer, Bangladesh 337 kilometers. So, and where it is called Jamuna, this Brahmaputra, and it merges with Ganges, Ganga, which is called in Bangladesh Padma, and then Meghna in Bangladesh, and eventually flow into the Bay of Bengal. So if this forum, in this forum, with the name NADI, with the focus on Bay of Bengal cooperation, I really request to all of you, to the panelists, esteemed panelists, and to distinguished dignitaries here present here, to really look into this issue of integrated river basin management, because it's not only going to provide support to your agriculture and food security, but also I hope it will solve problem for massive flooding, land erosion, over exploitation of water, exploitation of floodplains. We also have a big problem of land erosion also. So maybe, I don't know, technically when it is designed, maybe one can find solution to that also. But it has to happen at big scale, not on small scale. We have like flood management program and all is traveling. So many programs are running, but in isolation, not integrated. Why can't we integrate all those things and act in a, of course, this will require, because again, like 4 countries are involved, no? Even Bhutan, China, India, Bangladesh. So it requires a lot of work at the top political level as well as bureaucratic level. And later, once it is solved, then we can, the other experts can start working. So, and which has mainly not happened because of the absence of transboundary cooperation in this regard. So with that, I'll conclude my submission on this subject. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Shashank. I think critical point, and I'd like to really flag this for the House and for the conference, is looking at an integrated river management approach. I think this has been something development workers, policymakers, think tanks have been talking for a long time. Somehow, I think the geographic boundaries and the politics around geographic boundaries tends sometimes to overpower the natural boundaries that river basin have. And we've heard about that rivers flow. They won't really respect the boundaries we try to create. But if we don't look at how we are going to manage it in an integrated manner, I don't think we'll find the solutions for holistic agriculture that we are looking at. So thank you, Shashank. And I would now like to pass on the floor to Dr. Syed Muntashir Mamoon, to you, sir.
Namaskar, salam, adab. And of course, it's good afternoon, right? Okay, so I think the more salient points have been heard. Most important points which one need to discuss is there. So I'm not going to discuss anything about the data or the statistics or for that matter frameworks even, let alone the quad or anything contravening the quad. I'll give you a story because that's what I'm good at. I tell stories, I learn stories. I grew up with my mother, who was a very pretty woman. And essentially, when she had me, she was just 15 or 16, probably. Not 15, not that young, but I grew up with her. So I grew up listening to her stories, many stories. And this part of the world, Dr. Nandita Barua is here. We are worshippers of the Adda Shakti. We are the Devi worshippers. Now, who are the Devis? It's not just with 10 hands and many things. No, it's about the creative force. So I'll not speak about anything which related to, I had prepared a very long PowerPoint presentation for each of you, but I thought that why bother? Because you can always find this information from everywhere and anywhere. Instead, the story is, when I had been a university student, Bangladesh was a food deficient country. And it was a food deficient country, not because of water shortage, not because of unavailability of technology, but because of politics. In my understanding, though water and other implements, agricultural extension, innovation, seeds, manures, fertilizers, name it. There are many components to agriculture. And I have very good agricultural specialists sitting on the floor. So I'm not going to speak about those complementarities which is there. But it's about the identity of humans, how we see life, how we conceive our own constructs, and how we conceptualize the system's perspective into the way that we are as humans, as living human elements inside a certain system. So, ladies and gentlemen, for a couple of minutes, forget that I'm a Director General from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh. There are many different identities. Essentially, I teach artificial intelligence as well. So I'd probably try to take you more towards that area. Artificial intelligence is coming, so be aware of it. So essentially, what I'm looking at for my part is a systems perspective and the narrative epistemology of being a citizen, being a human. And if we could bring the humans in the center of the definition. You know, when we were, again, children, there was a writer. I'm not sure if any one of you have read it. Neuromancer. There was a book in the early 80s. Richard Gibson, that the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. You have to find the pieces and put it together. So whatever that we're discussing about, food security, insecurity, it's already here. You just have to identify where they are. I'll give you two definitions. First, which is from the World Food Security Summit. Food security is defined as meaning that all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their food preferences and dietary needs for an active and healthy life. I'll give you another definition. Whenever that you're in a mess, try to go back to the definitions to find out why you had been here in the first place. And that's from the United States Department of Agriculture, which defines food insecurity as a situation of limited or uncertain availability of nutritionally adequate and safe foods, or limited or uncertain ability to acquire acceptable foods in socially acceptable ways. So food security and food insecurity are not necessarily opposite to each other. These are two very different constructs altogether. So when someone is speaking about food security, or for that matter, agricultural sustainability, and in a time frame when we are essentially in a time of, in the very beginning, there was Samudra Manthan. And out of the Manthan came two things. Apart from the Devis and the Ratnas and other things, came two things. One was the Amrita, life-giving nectar. And the other was Hala Hala, the most devastating poison from the same Samudra Manthan. I have reasons to believe that the whole world is going to that kind of a Samudra Manthan at this moment. Now, don't quote me anywhere, because for next couple of minutes, I'm not a foreign service officer here. I'm just someone who wants to think with you, along with you, alongside you, probably. So that's the second definition that I want you to just remember. Why? Because there are four pillars to food security, as have been defined by more knowledgeable individuals globally. One is availability, two is access, three is utilization, and the four, stability. If I'm not wrong, the reason that we're discussing all these things here is because we are facing a certain uncertain situation in the days ahead because of climate changes, adverse changes in the climate, rising insecurity in the global security domain, the governance issues, finance, food, fuel, finance, at the Addis Ababa Declaration had put it in succinctly in 2014. We are facing uncertainty. It's not risk. In finance, there's a difference between risk and uncertainty. I'm sure if Mr. Shashank Rai would be looking at it, uncertainty and risk are two different things. Risk is you know exactly what you're getting, even if that's a problem, even if that's a threat. But uncertainty is something which you cannot really fathom. It's like more like anarchy. And I'll take a cue from Ms. Ron Answorth, who was speaking about the women empowerment. You know, there's a study which was conducted by Manchester in 2017. I was, in fact, one of the supervisors of it. Interestingly, food insecurity, climate adversity have produced some of the most ferocious, if not ferocious, most foundationally important leadership inside Bangladesh in women. If you look at our women leadership, which includes the Honorable Prime Minister, who single-handedly, and I must say single-handedly, changed the country from being an LDC to a very aspiring and ambitious developing country, and we are going ahead. We're growing fast in spite of many things. She comes from essentially an area which is highly climate adverse. Our Speaker of Parliament comes from an area which is highly climate adverse, which is also food insecure. Now, essentially, in spite of being a Muslim majority country, we have women leadership across the whole length and breadth of the country, and which is coming essentially from, again, areas of insecurity. That is something to look at. In 2009, when this government had taken power, we had defined the foreign policy objectives inside. It's not an official statement. That economy, ecology, security, and governance, these are our core issues. Slowly and gradually, we tried to superimpose that structure or that objective structure with something what we call in Oxford, the Oxford vantage point of technology, markets, and organizations connecting that. And on top of it, since let's say 2018, we started developing the technical application platforms, the finance, and the equitable distribution of wealth as our core objectives. Why? Because we come from, and essentially not only Bangladesh, but also the whole of Northeast, and even West Bengal, and part of the Indian East, if you'd like to look at the South Asian subcontinent, Nepal, Bhutan, Indians, East, Bangladesh, and many countries associated with it, or regions associated with, we are bottom of pyramid markets. And bottom of pyramid markets have very peculiar characteristics. We have institutional voids. We don't have many rules and regulations which guide exactly what to do, what to expect, what not. Second, we have inchoate demands. We know that we want something, but we don't exactly know what it is. And third is we have distributed and divided and disjointed demand bases. Out of these 12 or 13 characteristic traits that BOP markets share, which I'd written in one of my books 2 years before, I think these are the three more important elements which affect the way that we see governance and systems into operation, in perspective, and how we see that we operate between and amongst, as you were saying, cross-boundary definition of our projects and other things. What we need is not essentially only water. Yes, water is very important, and that is why we are here. The Honorable Foreign Minister yesterday, Bangladesh Foreign Minister, categorically said that water, the rivers are our mothers. Essentially, the whole of life and living ecosystem in this part of the world grew out of the rivers. And we have desecrated that riverine ecosystem with indiscreet human indiscretion. Indiscreet and indiscretion. That is something which is completely unacceptable to me as a thinker, no matter which country has done it. Inside Bangladesh, we have created a legal architecture where the river has acquired a legal personality. Now the rivers have inviolable legal rights as a legal person. And that has been upheld by the Honorable Prime Minister in her many decisions. So we are trying to get our rivers back from land grabbers, landfills, and unnecessary bridges. As I was just listening in the last session, that, okay, what happens? Mr. Sanjay Hajarika is there. So what happens when you have a bridge? Yes, we need to have bridge. Bridges have different, very important connotations, but we need to have bridges in a way which does not really obstruct or kill the rivers or the environmental flow of the rivers. What we need? Systems, infrastructure, capabilities, rules of procedure, rules of engagement, and more importantly, a political intent, an iron will to create a system which serves the people, which puts the people, the human individual, at the very center of our planning. Now, I would like to go one step ahead, but I'm sure I have many policymakers from my own country here, so I'd not like to go that far. That put the rivers in the center, put the land, Mother Earth at the center, then put the people, then put your countries. Across all foundational barriers that we call the sovereign barriers, countries will always remain, the flag will always remain, and I'm proud to be there. But is your people not my people? Can you tell me that a Bangladeshi is also not your concern as a human? Can I say that no matter what happens in India, doesn't really matter? Can I say that? No, I cannot. Because in Bangladesh, in Bengal to be specific, we call it a syncretic culture. Shobar upore manush sotto, tahar upore. That's what we call it. The first is humans. The religion, the spirit, the faith is in humanity. On top of it comes your all other systems. Be it a country, be it a government, be it anything else, no matter how you define it. The first is the core, and the core is the human spirit. As we have said, the food, fuel, finance, that could be complemented by innovation, entrepreneurship, and equity. Can the human individual have an equitable access to the ownership of the systems which serves it? Can the human individual say that the government which represents it, that the government belongs to it? Now, it's not that can someone say it or not. That is a question that one needs to answer at every single step, at every single juncture of a decision. Personally, I'm looking at a future which is underwritten by artificial intelligence. That there is a reason that I brought it here. And the reason is, I told you that in the very beginning, it's not the unavailability of water or the unavailability of seeds, which is a very important issue, as I was telling you before, that Bangladesh was a food deficient country. Just 2 more minutes. Why it was food deficient country? Because we had prescriptions from more knowledgeable organizations which say that divest from the agriculture sector. But the very moment that this prime minister came to power, the first target of increasing investment was in the agriculture sector. Let the farmers leave first, then everything else will come. Look at it today. Once the food structure has been there, the whole country has started moving up ahead. So essentially, it is a question of identity politics, which will be exacerbated with the introduction of the artificial intelligence, the bias and everything else. Blockchain is already there. What happens is, for everything else, including water and other availability of resources and the implements, it is information which is important. Information connected to the systems of technology, markets, and organizations. So that the human agency, the human autonomy, and the human franchise in making a decision about life, living, livelihood, and sustainability is ensured by the system, is guaranteed by the system, and the human individual can claim ownership on each aspect of the governance spectrum which affects him or her. So that's in short about all the things that I wanted to discuss. I have spared you the trouble of giving you a very elaborate and lengthy data-filled information, but I just wanted to share with you some of my stories which helped me survive, thrive, grow, and then aspire and dream. Many years before, someone had told me that Bangladesh, okay, you will survive somehow. Today, it's difficult to say this. Why? Because we have gone to the roots, absolutely the roots, the grasses. And as someone was saying that we need big projects, yes, we definitely need big projects. But these big projects must have the smallest components very prominently featured there. The ants and the mice. Lord Ganesha travels on top of mice, or mouse for that matter. And the mice or the ants are the human individuals. We, all of us, each of us individually, are the ants and the mice. And so these small components need to feature very prominently in the very big projects that we're all discussing about and we're all thinking about, dreaming about, and probably speaking about. That's where I leave you with. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Mr. Syed. I think it was interesting that the 4 points that you said, availability, access, utilization, and stability, clearly brings to the fore that all of these 4 key issues make it an interconnected process globally. I think we are looking at food insecurity on our face right now. We saw what happened with the Ukraine war, the wheat shortage, how we kind of looked at one another to release, put embargoes, not put embargoes. Clearly, this whole issue of availability, access, utilization, and sustainability needs to be defined from a much larger human-centric lens that we're talking about. It definitely links to the earlier point of looking at water as an integrated process, which again, at the core is none of these are resources that can be claimed by any one nation, state, or geography. I do like the fact that you talked about, even Shashank, about water and land is finite. I don't think we need anybody to tell us that. Population seems to be infinite. We grow at a pace that our land and water cannot keep in match up with. And therefore, bringing the centrality of that connectedness, of that integrated approach becomes critical when we are looking at food security. I'm now going to hand it over to Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay to really kind of bring it all together, what we have heard, and we look forward to hearing you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers, the NADI conference and the Asian Confluence for inviting me to this very important event that has been held for the last few years. And I'd also very much like to thank the chair and the panelists for accommodating me or changing the order of speakers so that I could be last. Mainly, I've been traveling on the road for long stretches of time in the last few days. I'd also like to thank them. Actually, in fact, in many ways, I came for this event thinking more in terms of the political economy of the region and how this had affected livelihoods, security, sustainable agriculture, and regional cooperation. But actually listening to the speakers who have actually already spoken on a kind of large canvas and a kind of panoramic way, I thought I'd deviate a little. And I see that this session is actually billed as technical session 2. So taking advantage of the fact that this is a technical session, I thought I would speak on actually a very concrete experiment that a foundation is experimenting with me in a small area of Manipur, which I inhabit at this point of time. So it's a very personal experience, but I would like to sort of bring in a little bit of the local flavor into this. And I think you will find that as I speak on very local concerns, that many of the insights that we have seen from the panelists will resonate because they are pretty much speaking about the same thing on a much larger scale. So the area that we inhabit is a small village, probably less than about 50 households, about less than a kilometer, in fact, on the Asian highway, about an hour and a half outside Manipur. The village is essentially an entirely farming village. Land holdings are small, maybe 2 to 3 acres at the most. Everybody has food to eat because everybody has access to rice. If they don't own the land, they share crop. And out of the share crop, they make enough rice to live for the year. But nobody has cash income to be able to do their smallest, to meet their smallest of needs, whether it's education or health or festivals or any other such event. What we have been seeing over the years is that under this kind of pressure, there has been a severe destruction and denudation of the forests. Increasingly, after the forests have been denuded, they have quarried stone. And after they have quarried stone, they have started quarrying the rivers for stone and for sand. And the point that I wanted to pick up from my larger point about political economy is that starting with colonialism, this entire region has inherited an entirely extractive economy. In the colonial period, the extractive economy depended on timber, oil, rice, which is a kind of, because it was needed for the international markets at that time when there was a kind of rice shortage. And finally, of course, tea plantations. For all of this, the labor, by and large, came from outside the region. So it was a completely transplanted and an extractive economy. If we look at the economy today, it's actually much the same. All that has changed is timber has gone, it has been replaced by hydroelectricity. Tea still remains there, but now we have more than tea plantations, we have rubber plantations, and now we want to bring in oil plantations, cashew plantations, all exotic plantations, exotic crops that are not native to the region. And imagine what kind of ecological ripple effects that they bring with them. And stone, and the other sort of colonial economy product was coal. Today that coal has expanded to include limestone, stone quarrying, and many other forms. So 70 years after independence, we are still continuing with an extractive and colonial economy. The second implication of the point that I wanted to make in the sphere of political economy is the sheer fragmentation of the region since then. In the colonial period, this was one region. It was one region linked to international trade through the imperial trade. The market was, in effect, what was the imperial market of that time. And the entire region was part of one colonial state. Therefore, there was clearly easy movement, transport, transit, and so on. And without that, perhaps the tea industry in Assam would not even have been possible. But today, what we see is a much more fragmented region, fragmented in terms of nations, fragmented within states, and along with that fragmentation, everything that has been affected, agriculture, sustainability, livelihood, food security, water, and most of all, regional cooperation. In fact, why do we need regional cooperation? Precisely because the levels of integration that we had have been disintegrated. Now you need to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So coming back to my village. So here we have an economy which is entirely sustained on one crop, rain-fed, no cropping during the winters because there's a river, there's an abundance of water. But in 70 years, no government or the underground for that matter, or civil society has built a minor irrigation system to be able to irrigate the fields, or brought in techniques of cultivation that could have sustained agriculture during the non-rainy periods. So the foundation I'm talking about, and I don't want to take names because it's more the ideas that go behind than the foundation itself, has come in with this idea that, first of all, the root cause of the problem is deforestation, and therefore the solution to the problem must begin with afforestation. Because of deforestation, agriculture has become unsustainable. Because of deforestation, now you have soil erosion, you have landslides. Even the minor irrigation channels that the villagers make periodically, are ravaged by landslides. So they have to keep repairing these things all over again. So an afforestation model built on a biological survey of the area, containing entirely of native trees, native species that have grown together in proximity over a period of time, and with an emphasis, a little greater emphasis within that on economic resources, economic trees. That means trees that the villagers can actually harvest to be able to use as a means of livelihood and food security. The second concept that we are bringing is this idea of agroforestry. And in this agroforestry, in an area where there has been rice monocropping, single crop, we are bringing in this idea of tiered agriculture. Tiered agriculture means at one level you can have, let's say, a moringa tree, which has a light foliage, which is nitrogen fixing, or for what is called yongchak in that area, or monkey bean in some other areas, which is also nitrogen fixing. The fruit is highly valued in that area. At another level, you could have fruit trees, grapefruit, endemic fruit trees that are local there. Grapefruits, bananas, but especially papaya, because papaya has properties that complement the other crops that we grow there. At the third level, you have the lemon tree that flourishes very easily there. At the fourth level, you have, let's say, chilies, which are endemic all over the Northeast and are, of course, a very high value commodity. At the fifth level, you have root crops like ginger, turmeric, and a range of other local root crops that can easily be popularized and commercialized, particularly because they have very high nutritional value. And in between these various 5 levels, You can have creepers, vines and planters like pepper, if you want to go in that direction, the palm leaf. And each one of these 5 or 6 levels yields a revenue stream that can be tapped at some time or the other through the year. Now, in the absence of this, what has been happening is, I mentioned to you about deforestation and I mentioned to you about the rivers, but as people are not able to survive with what they have and not able to have that little cash income that they have taken to poppy plantation and they are virtually destroying the rivers. When they speak about the rivers, they talk about the rivers being life-giving, but the life that they are thinking of is the stones that they are breaking on the river. And in the process, they are actually destroying the river. And if you try to even touch this, the entire political economy and the local economy is so intertwined that you would have actually a kind of mass mobilization to prevent anyone. In fact, the state constantly tries to ban riverbed mining and poppy cultivation, but is not successful because they simply do not have alternative modes of. But it's much more than that. You talked about river, we talked about food security. It is possible in that river to create check dams. It is possible to tap that river for hydroelectricity. It is possible in an area where there is sun and there is a lot of wind. It's possible to have alternate sources of energy, which is wind, sun, and hydro. It's possible to integrate all these things into one system that can work at the best of times and the best of seasons. It's possible to integrate that with the Internet of Things and with artificial intelligence, if you would wish to, particularly with the irrigation part of it. But none of this has been done. And this is not purely a local phenomenon. You talked about scale, large scale. In my view, each one of these things actually does not require large scale. It's what needs to be done is what is small on a large scale. In other words, small scale projects on a very large scale so that they make a big difference. Because they can stand independently. It's possible for me tomorrow to actually have a agri-processing unit out of the energy that can be generated locally. And, the check dams, again, they don't need masonry. This is an area abundant in bamboo. You can make check dams out of bamboo. You can make channels. You don't have to have masonry channels for the river waters for your irrigation. They can be done out of bamboo and various many other kinds of local products that can be done. And in the process, what we are discovering is the interdependence of simple little things. Local people know that the leaves of this plant or the roots of this plant keep off this pest or that pest. And it's a kind of revival of local knowledge, which is actually already there. It's rather that local knowledge needs to be much better known and needs to be brought into the scientific mainstream and curriculum. This is what we see there. And it doesn't have to be limited to that village. Because when we expand this model from village to village and from country to country, imagine today, I used to be ambassador in Myanmar. Again, a totally agrarian economy, 80% of people, much like here, dependent on land, water, sun, and forests, with the primary occupations being agriculture, fishing, livestock, and foraging from the forests. When we think of agriculture as essentially something unsustainable, especially subsistence agriculture or small-scale agriculture or small farmers, as unsustainable, unviable, and the economic model that we have and the political model that we have is to say that we need to move them out, we need to consolidate these agricultural holdings to make it much more economic. And of course, that ultimately leads to a model of agriculture that was developed in the New World, where you had lots of land after, of course, the indigenous people had been eliminated. And you could and you needed that kind of large-scale industrial agriculture. But in the peopled world, in Asia, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Japan, in Europe, where people live, people actually worked on protecting their farms, protecting their small farmers, and making their farms viable. And I think the model that I offered you was a model that perhaps could make small agriculture and everything that goes with it, because there's a whole culture that goes with it, which is also linked to the community, which would be nourished in the process. Thank you. My apologies if I
Thank you
exceeded my
so
time.
much. First of all, thank you so much for keeping time. This was really wonderful. I do think that the narrative that you have put forward, sir, is so valid in terms of really looking at local knowledge, locally driven solution, but which are adaptable. I think we have got into this thing of saying the bigger, the nicer, the prettier, the larger. What we have forgotten is smaller initiatives can be made and amplified big. They don't have to be big in themselves. And I think the scale and dimension in which you can spread it out is what is important. This has been a very, very informative, interesting panel. I first want to thank the panel for keeping time. We were really pushed to do this within an hour, and I would have really loved to hear more from each of you, as would have the audience, because things that you brought out were very critical to the larger discussion that we are having on a more inclusive, more secure, more equitable region that we all inhabit. So with this, I would like to conclude the session, and I think I'd like the organizers to invite them for any elicitation that they have in mind. If not, I can give a thank you to my panel. And okay, we do. Thank you so much.
I request Mrs. Deepa Wadhwa, member of the Governing Council of Asian Confluence, to kindly come on the stage and felicitate the chair and the panelists. Can we have a group photograph, please? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I request you to kindly be back here after lunch by 1:45, because the Honorable Finance Minister has a very tight schedule. She will leave by 3. So we are ensuring that this session begins by 2. And for that, I'd request you all to kindly take your seats around 1:45 or so. Thank you so much.